Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our weekly Hebrew word study. And we are again in 1 Samuel chapter 25 and picking up on verse 18. Last week we left off on David, of course, being very angry at this Nabal, this man, and we looked at his name and just the connotation of that he was a failure morally and probably spiritually also. And now we're moving on. That, of course, David wanted to exact vengeance against this guy's whole family and was going to kill them all. So that's where we come in today. And of course, here we pick up verse 18 and made haste. This guy's wife, and her name is Abigail, which in Hebrew is Avigail. And you'll notice here, looking at the Hebrew, you'll see her name inputted twice here, listed twice, one in some brackets, another one in parentheses, and the one on the right side does not have any vowel pointings on it, but the one on the left side does have the vowel pointings. This is what's known as a keriv and ketiv in Hebrew. In the um, Hebrew manuscripts, which does not show up in any English translation, but there are words that are thought to be um, unknown as to how they are to be pronounced, that the pronunciation was lost. And so the Jewish scholars, as they are going through this, did not want to subtract or remove the word, even though it was a word that made no sense to them, because it was unpronounceable and they just didn't know how to pronounce it. So what they did was they put these brackets around them, which is the word you see on the right-hand side. And then in parentheses, they put what word they felt it should be spelled in the way that they understood. And of course, when the Masoretes were doing this between 300 and 900 AD, they then put in the vowel pointings. And so this lady's name was spelled Aleph, Bet, Vav, Gimel, Yod, Lamed, but that is not a pronunciation that anybody's familiar with, although we do know that the Vav and the Yud are sometimes used interchangeably and have been used interchangeably, um, and can be substituted when you are looking up the root form of the word in a lexicon, that if you can't find it with a Yud in it, substitute a Vav, and those were kind of used interchangeably as letter um, vowels that they're called. So regardless of that, we get to Abigail and of Giel, and we look at her name. Um, and of course, we may have, I believe, looked at this earlier, that it really means joy of my father. And it's a compound word. The Aleph and the Beit is the name for father or Av, and Yagil is joy. And so this was only two women named this in the entire scriptures. One was this person we're talking about, and the other was David, I believe, had a sister. And so, yeah, sister of David in Chronicles, that her name was Abigail. So it's kind of an interesting name, has a beauty to it. Not really sure why she was named that and the significance, but it's here, and many people have used that name throughout the centuries afterwards for naming young girls. So this industrious lady is finding out what's going on. She was made aware that David's men were coming, and so she's preparing to intervene. And it lists the stock of what she pulls together to offer to David's men. And she takes 200 loaves of bread. Now, if you think of that, how long and how many people does it take to make 200 loaves of bread? This could take hours. And how much flour and other components were required, and the baking time and so forth. So it's quite a bit. And remember, there are 400 men coming. David had a band of 600, 200 were left behind, and 400 were on their way. And maybe Abigail does not know how many are coming. So we're going to compare what she prepares versus how many people there are to feed. So she gets 200 loaves of bread. So it would be, at least for the 400 men coming, it'd be a half a loaf of bread for each one. That seems about right. But then we look and see that there's only two skins of wine. And of course, we don't know how big those skins are. Obviously, in the largest size, they could be the size of a sheep. So it could hold, maybe 5, 10 gallons, but obviously not a lot of wine being sent along for 400 men. So, and then there were 5 sheep. So again, 5 sheep to feed 400 men just doesn't seem appropriate. Here you see the word for how the sheep were prepared, asuot. You see the ketiv versus a keriv, how it's written and versus how it's understood and pronounced. And then 5 seahs of grain. And so again, just putting this list together, what kind of grain, of roasted grain that she's offering to these men. 100 clusters of raisins. Again, very interesting food. 200 cakes of figs, which would be maybe more of the dessert loaded for them. And she loaded them onto donkeys. So it's just interesting to look at the diet of what she felt would be a offering that would keep her from and her family from being destroyed. Um, so again, would this be something we would relate to, of how to keep a band of 400 men pacified? Would it be enough to supply the needs to where they felt they could cancel their mission of going to annihilate these people? So kind of interesting to look at that. And so she loaded them onto donkeys, and she said to her servants, "Go before me, and I will come after you." And of course, she obviously didn't tell her husband anything of what was going on. And so it came to pass, as she rode on the donkey, she went under the cover of the hill, and there encountered David coming towards her. Obviously, this was a road. She knew she would encounter them, because that's what she wanted to do. She wanted to make sure she met them and was able to intervene and stop them before they carried out their act of vengeance upon her family. And she ran and met them, and of course, here we get a little bit of a recap of for why David's on his path. He's still fuming. He's still very, very angry. Said, "In vain I have protected that this fellow has," and just reiterates his mission again, and that evil was repaid him. And so then verse 22 is where we're going to end today, and a very humorous, interesting passage here that I want to point out. And so he's saying, that he will repay them um, just like he would repay his enemies. And he even invokes the name of God here. It is Elohim. And Ko Ya'aseh Elohim Le'oyve. You may have heard that oive used quite often. It is a very common Hebrew expression. Here, at least, it means um, of my enemies. It's an exclamation of something that's occurring and pursuing and persecuting you. So he says, and may God pour out his vengeance and let me do what I need to do upon this guy and also all of my enemies. And he's saying, if I leave at all, and here's where it gets really interesting, asher lo ad haboker um, mashtin bekir. And of course, we're going to see many different translations here. Here it says one who by the morning light, and it says one male in wall. Well, what's the wall have to do with it? What is the male have to do with it? So we're going to open up this word musteen, and by clicking on it, and we see some very interesting. It's actually the word to urinate, and of course, those of you that are familiar with the King James version, I'm sure this causes a lot of chuckles to all the kids in these Sunday school classes that have read King James when they were when they were little, and again, the NAS version translates it as male. King James has it as urinate, but uses the 16th century language for urinating. And so, again, this is kind of interesting. It's used 9 times in the Bible. 3 times it's translated as every 6 times it's translated as male. And it's again, it's giving the indication of a male gender but it also gives us an indication of what their um, hygiene and bathroom culture was back in those days. Obviously, there were wars going on. They didn't have running water and city sewers, and um, they maybe didn't even have areas that were designated for, um, the bathrooms. But here it was definitely pretty common knowledge that if there was a wall and you were a guy, this is what you could do against the wall when you needed to relieve yourself. The fact that that makes it into biblical passages and gives us a little bit of insight into the culture of that time. Obviously, very foreign to us, very different, but it does enlighten us by having these Hebrew words and being able to look at these. We're going to look at the word for wall, see if it gives us anything special there. It doesn't. It's just kier, and it's used wall exclusively. So I hope you enjoyed that. Again, very interesting things that we can learn from the language to help us discover the mindset of what was going on at this time. And next week we will come back and see whether Abigail was successful in her attempt to intervene and prevent the slaughter of her families by David. All right. Well, God bless you all. Take care and have yourself a blessed week. Bye bye.